Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, thank you, audience and teachers, for coming out to this event. It's a teach-in and call to action. Make sure you sign in on the sheet that's being passed around. My name is Tunisia, and we, me, Anna, William, and Natalie, who's in the back right now, are students working against prisons, SWAP, and we educate about the prison industrial complex, offer solidarity and support to prisoners, and end Chicago's ties to prisons. We meet on Mondays at 6 p.m. in the Center for Identity and Inclusion. Today's event is on ending solitary confinement, addressing questions like why solitary confinement torture, what makes it a racial justice and queer issue, what is the history of solitary confinement in Illinois. These questions and more will be answered through a teach-in, followed by a question and answer portion, and then we can join the cause by writing letters in support of prisoners. So please, if you are able to stay for the duration of the evening, do so we can show our support and efforts in a tangible way. Our teachers for the night include Alan Mills, Executive Director of Uptown People's Law Center, an attorney that has litigated against solitary confinement since 1982. Greg Koger, am I saying that correctly?
Koger.
Okay.
Just call me Gregory.
Co-founder of Torture Survivors Against Solitary, and a solitary confinement survivor.
Thank you.
Brian Nelson, Prisoners' Rights Coordinator at Uptown People's Law Center and a solitary confinement survivor. And Afrika, a member of Black and Pink Chicago. So without further ado,
And a solitary
and a solitary survivor. Apologies. So without further ado, we can begin.
Alright, so my job tonight is to sort of give an overview of solitary and let the real experts, the people who lived in it, tell you much more about it. I think first thing to know is there's way too many people in prison in the United States, more than we've ever had in the history of the country. So you can see up until sort of the early 70s, it was pretty flat, and then between the 70s and now it has skyrocketed. If you go a couple more years out past this chart, there's a little bit of a dip, but the dip gets us back to about where we were in 2006, nowhere near where we were in 1970. So that's the most important thing about the entire thing, is there's just too many people in prison. Can't solve solitary until we get rid of a lot of people out of prison. We're going to talk about solitary, and no state admits that they use solitary, or federal government or anything else. They all call it something else. So we've got a generally accepted definition internationally of what solitary means. It means you're locked in a cell involuntarily, 22 to 24 hours a day. No meaningful social contact. That means you can be double-celled and still be in solitary. It sounds counterintuitive, but in fact, studies show, and everybody I've actually talked to will agree, that putting two people in a small room 24 hours a day who don't know each other, or even who are good friends before they start, is even worse than being all by yourself. If you've ever lived with anybody, you can imagine that there are times when you need to sort of separate and get your own space or get away from that other person, and that's usually somebody you actually know and chose to live with. So imagine having to do that in your bathroom, a very small space, 24 hours a day, no privacy, no nothing, with this total stranger. You can see why that might be a little tense. There are about 100,000 people in solitary using this definition in the United States. Illinois has about 8,000 of them. Most people think about solitary, they think about people who have committed some horrible violation inside prison, like they tried to kill somebody, they tried to stab a guard. There are some of those, but that's not where the vast majority of people are. So 2,000 people in Illinois are in solitary for what Illinois calls disciplinary segregation, meaning they've been charged with and found guilty of some sort of rule violation. But it doesn't have to be a serious rule violation. Taking an extra cookie from the dining hall back to your cell can end you in solitary. Rolling your eyes at a guard can end you in solitary. Having too many books in your cell can end you in solitary. Having the wrong book in your cell can send you in solitary. One that they decide should have been censored by the mailroom, but wasn't. They gave it to you, then somebody else comes by later and says, oh, this is kind of danger, and I'll have this, off to solitary. But that's only 2,000 people in Illinois. There's a couple hundred in administrative detention, meaning they haven't actually done anything wrong, but somebody thinks they might do something wrong, or might be a bad influence on the prison system, so they get sent to administrative detention. There's only a couple hundred of those. we're not quite sure how many. They made up this new designation called room restriction in Illinois, which has no basis in the regulations, so we're not quite sure what it is. But we keep running across people who they say are not solitary, but they never get to leave their cell anyway. So they've made up this new category called room restriction. As far as we can tell, it's less than 100 people now, but it seems to be the new experimental thing they're trying in the Department of Corrections. The rest of them, which means over 5,000 people, are in what they call general population, meaning they have done nothing wrong, they're not charged with anything wrong, they're just locked in their cell 22 to 24 hours a day because we have nothing for them to do. Literally nothing for them to do. No classes, no vocational school, no jobs, and therefore, since there's nothing for them to do, they just sit in their cells. This is the disciplinary part of segregation, and I've listed some of the things. It's a nifty graphic done by the Chicago Reporter, which we've stolen for the purposes of tonight. And it shows a lot of people going to solitary for things that aren't dangerous. Disobeying a direct order, for example, could be simply, well, my favorite example is somebody who's seriously mentally ill, schizophrenia, not being medicated, pounds his head against the wall, they tell him to stop, he doesn't stop, that's disobeying a direct order. You get sent to solitary for that, and you are. Non-dangerous contraband would be like the cookie I talked about. Unauthorized movement. Anybody have any idea why cookies might be contraband in prison? First of all, there's an insect problem. Maybe that's it. But you can also, fruit plus yeast, piece of bread, cookies, something like that, makes alcohol. So you can actually make alcohol, which means not only can it be contraband, but it can also be drugs or drug paraphernalia. The cookie can be if they feel like writing up out of it. Or taking apple back. Continuing to chew an apple after you walk out of the dining hall back to your cell. They can count that as drug paraphernalia if they want to. Unauthorized movement sounds terrible. It sounds like you're trying to escape. No, all it means is you stop at the next door cell to talk to somebody on your way back to the cell when you were supposed to just go directly to your cell. So you can get sent to solitary even for an offense, even for that 2,000 or the 8,000 people that are in there for some disciplinary reason, for really petty things. Among those people who go to solitary, about 10% of them in Illinois are there for more than 10 years. Under international law, we talk about 15 days as being torture. Got 30% for more than 1 year, 10% for more than 10 years in Illinois. So that's a lot of people who are way over the 15 days. The other 60% are less than a year. We tend to build castles or forts to keep our people in solitary. This is Stateville. Looks like an ancient fort. It's actually the newest of our three big maximum security units. Stateville, Pontiac, and Menard. Stateville was completed in about 1921. This is what it looks like from the air. The solitary unit is the round building at the top right sort of corner up there.
That's I House.
Was. No. That's, no, wrong way. That's the theater. I House are the two, top and bottom. I House and J House, those used to be SEG, but they're now empty, closed.
Oh, you're right.
They closed them because they're falling apart. It's this round house up here, the one that looks like a circle. That is what's commonly known as F House, the Panopticon, which Governor Warner just announced is being closed, and they're in fact moving people out of it because he said it is way too stressful for anybody to live there, which is what our experts have said in both our segregation case and our mental health case, and what people have been saying really since they were built in 1920. They were a bad idea. They tore down most of them. The last one's going. So that's mostly where we put people in solitary. The big long one on the opposite side, right down by Gregory there, that's what used to be called B House, is now B, C, D, and E House. The quads, as they call them, because they cut it into 4 sections to make it more manageable. And that's where all the prisoners, almost all the prisoners at State Florida are going to be once they finish emptying out Roundhouse. This is a picture of a typical B House cell. They've stuffed 2 cells into a cell that was designed, 2 beds into a cell that was designed for 1 person. This would be a solitary unit with the bars open. This is F House on the inside. Those cells are much smaller and less nice, if that's possible, than the B House cells are. These are worse, which is why they're closing this one. This is Pontiac, which on the right hand edge by the green is North and South House, and up to the very top along the green is East-West House. They don't creatively name things like Pontiac East, West, North, South because it's North and South and East and West. Those all have segregation in them. Almost all of the cells in Pontiac are one form of segregation or another. There is no one in Pontiac who gets out of their cell more than 2 hours every day. Even protective custody, which is there. And there's a very small general population group there, but they don't get out of their cell very much at all. Looking at it from the ground level, you can see it's again sort of a fortress-style building. And this is North 1, the highest security part of Pontiac, where they put, unfortunately, most mentally ill people as well as those in segregation. They have solid doors, not like the bars we saw at Stateville. It's loud, it's horrible. People scream all night long, all day long, all night long. People pound on the doors, and they're generally ignored until they get worse and worse and worse. It's not a good place to be. Even if you're not mentally ill, it's not a good place to be. This is Menard Correctional Center. It's the oldest of them. It was started in the 1860s, and the new parts were also completed about 1920, 1925, somewhere in there. Again, this is a bird's eye view. There is a north and south house, north annex, and the south are along the front. And then, although it's parallel, they also call it east and west in the back. I have no idea how they call one north, south, the other east and west, even though they're parallel to each other, but someone didn't know their directions very well. And again, the vast majority of people at Menard are locked in their cells 22 to 24 hours a day. They keep moving around what they call solid segregation, disciplinary segregation. It's mostly, Brian, these days North Annex, is that what you've got?
North 1 and 2.
North 1 and 2, okay. So, but again, even if you're in general population back in east to west house, you're probably locking yourself 22 to 24 hours a day. Some of the cells at Menard are very much like the ones in Pontiac, also have solid fronts to them. There's not, the chain lock on here is not part of the cell itself. That's because one cellmate killed his other cellmate. That's a crime scene. So that's at the moment locked off. You can imagine, as I said, there's a lot of tension in these little cells. And in a cell like this, no way to see what's happening inside. So there's a fair amount of violence nationwide in these double-celled solitary cells. And this is the inside of one of those cells with a solid front on it. You can only see one of the beds, but there's a second one above that. So this is 2 people, and that is their floor space. That is the entirety of where they get to live 22 to 24 hours a day. Most days, 24 hours a day. So both people can stand up in the cell, but they both can't move at the same time. The ones without solid fronts are a little bit airier because they have bars instead of solid steel, so you get a little bit of light through. You notice there's no lights, no windows in these cells. So at least here, there's a window across the hallway which you kind of gives you some light, but it gives you also an idea of just how tiny these cells are. So the United States Supreme Court, I'm a lawyer, so I'll talk a little bit about the courts. Last year, in 2015, this is a death penalty case. It had nothing to do with solitary, but one of the justices, Justice Kennedy, who's generally considered a swing vote on the court, suggested that solitary is a really bad place, and suggested that if the court were presented with a proper case challenging solitary, they might be willing to do something about it. And since he's the swing vote, that sounds like a good idea to a lot of people. So a lot of people are suing trying to bring various kinds of cases, hoping something up to the Supreme Court, and they will actually declare solitary unconstitutional. They did so and recognized how bad it was back in the 1800s, and we stopped using it. But then in the 1970s, we started up again, and everybody ignored this old case, as that doesn't mean anything anymore. We don't really use solitary, but we do. So it's time to bring this back to the court. It's time to end it. These are different legal theories we've tried. People have talked about due process. That is, do you get some kind of hearing before you're put in solitary, or can you just be stuck there? The general answer is you can just be stuck there. You don't get any kind of hearing at all. You certainly don't get sent to solitary by a judge. But even, as I said, in Illinois, you've got the 2,000 that are there for disciplinary reasons. They get some sort of hearing, but the rest of them, they don't get any hearing. They just get sent there. More recently, there's litigation to keep certain groups of people out. People who are seriously mentally ill, juveniles. Illinois has ended solitary for juveniles, thankfully. So that's a good thing Illinois does. They're nowhere near ending it for adults. And then finally, it's the case that we were just talking about, saying the whole thing. Doesn't matter who goes there, doesn't matter special process, doesn't matter if they get hearings or not. It's just unconstitutional to torture people by leaving them in a cell all day long. Asper was the case that was brought in California. There was 30,000 people in California prisons on hunger strike 3 years ago. And there was a lawsuit filed at the same time. And all of that came together, and California has now substantially depopulated its most secure housing units. And it's about 95% lower than it was before, with no increase in violence, by the way. So this is not the only vulnerability system. We at the Uptown People's Law Center have a case pending called Davis, trying to do the same thing here in Illinois, trying to attack this mirror. The other thing to remember is this is not the only way to run a prison system. Other countries think we're insane. This is a Norwegian prison cell. Looks very different than Menard. IKEA sort of furniture, looks like a dorm room, right? Looks like a dorm, maybe nicer than a lot of dorm rooms. But this is a Norwegian prison cell. This is a Norwegian solitary cell. It has a lot less stuff in it. And he's there alone. And the guy who was put in here, which is the guy who went and slaughtered 47 kids, something like that, at a Norwegian day camp, was sentenced to solitary. Only given 17 years, by the way, whereas in Illinois, for example, the minimum sentence for any murder is 20 years. He got 17 for slaughtering a whole bunch of kids. And was put in a cell like this and sued, saying, doesn't matter how nice the cell is, it's inhumane to leave me alone all the time. And he won. And he won, saying that being kept in a cell like that is so inhumane and so likely to destroy your mind just because you're alone, that it was violated the European, I'm not going to get the right words, but the European civil rights laws that say you can't torture prisoners. This is a slightly different view of the same room, and he has his own bathroom and shower connected to it with a door that closes. It's like a humane sort of place to be. So you can run prison systems differently than the United States run them. You don't have to be nothing but punitive. So, and why does Norway do it like this? Because they have a whole different philosophy of corrections. We seem to think, or at least we act like we think, that the only way to get people to follow the rules is by really harshly punishing them. And if you don't follow the rules in prison, then we even more harshly punish you there. And if you don't, and ultimately you end up in this horrible little cell with two people stuck there forever. And somehow that's supposed to make you behave. Norway and much of the rest of the world thinks that's kind of crazy. And what really makes people behave is the same thing that makes us behave out here, which is that you're part of a community and you recognize that if everybody in the community follows a set of rules, you're all better off. And think about raising kids. You hope anyway, your kids aren't obeying you or aren't following rules because you're threatening to beat them. You hope that they're following rules because there's a lot of love in the household. So much of the world thinks that if you have somebody who's breaking the law, the problem is they're disconnected from that community, that they no longer feel plugged into that community. And therefore, what a prison is supposed to do is make sure that you're plugged into that community. So in those nifty Norway cells, you only live there during the week. You're required to have a job which is out in the community, not the job sweeping floors and making license plates inside the prison, but a job out in the community. You are allowed to go home every weekend and spend it with your family. And so that by the time your sentence ends, and they think of a 5-year sentence as a really, really long sentence, by the time your sentence ends, then you've reconnected with the community, you're ready to come out and move on with your life. That's a very different philosophy than the United States philosophy, which is that isolation somehow makes you better. Yes?
What if the prisoner doesn't have a family to come to on the weekends?
Then you find some other community. I mean, the whole point is to build community, whether it be with your own family or with your work family or whatever it is. You want to be part of the community. I'm not an expert on Norway's prisons, but I know that philosophy is building community ties rather than breaking them apart. And there's some good data coming out now and some good studies being done showing that in particularly low-income black communities in the United States, we have put so many people in prison that we've actually ripped apart what community bonds there are. And that actually mass incarceration is making our communities more dangerous rather than safer. And this is the exact opposite approach. Obviously what we've done isn't working. And the idea that the solution is that we have to lock up more people, anybody who thinks about the percentage of young black men in neighborhoods like Inglewood or Blue Line down the street here, where we lock up some 2/3 in some cases of young black men who haven't been in high school, who haven't graduated from high school. To say that the problem is we don't lock up, we need to lock up more of them is like, how many more is there? You're already locking up so many. So I suggest we try something else, and that's something true within the prison system. Rather than punishing people, let's build a community. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Spencer. You're up. You're up.
Okay. I'm Africa Queen Lockett of Black and Pink Chicago. Yes, I was in solitary confinement for 3.5 years. I was in Pontiac behind a steel door in North House, and I spent 3.5 years in that one area. All because I'm trans. You know, I mean, I wanted to be to myself, and the guards kept picking at me and bothering me, and tried to make me be something that I don't want to be. And they got mad, write up bogus disciplinary reports on me, and had me put in solitary confinement. Just because of that. I spent my time there for those 3.5 years, but they thought they could be to break me. They even sent what they call it, the Orange Crush on me, due to the fact because they say I didn't want to move out of the cell. They wanted to put me somewhere else, and they wanted the Orange Crush in on me. They rushed in on me, knocked me down, handcuffed me behind my back, dragged me up out of the cell, and then placed me in another cell. They stripped me naked, purely naked, with no clothes on, with no hospital gown or nothing to cover me, and didn't give me no mattress or anything. It was just a solid concrete floor. And I stayed like that until the following day, mental health came and saw me. Mental health said, they said you was acting erratic, and I said, no, that's not true. They got mad at me because I didn't want it to move. They said if they wanted you to move, you'd have to move. I said, no, because if I move, then I might be in a position where I could be harmed or hurt or even worse. So they said, well, what you want to do from this point? I said, well, I'm stuck here for the time being. So what is my options? And he said, well, you know, after you do your segregation time or solitary confinement time, we could put you in for Dixon Correctional Center. I said, well, I have no problem with that. They said, due to your mental background, you have schizoaffective and bipolar. I said, which I do. I accepted that to the point that I had that ever since I was a child, due to the fact my parents were murdered in front of me when I was 6 years old in Natal, KwaZulu, South Africa. I am a native of South Africa. Yes, they was murdered during apartheid. All because they was part of the ANC, which is an African National Congress, which is Nelson Mandela's group. Anyone that was going up against the government for the freedom of the whole people were murdered by the government on sight. And that's what happened to my parents. They never had the chance to see me grow up, to see what I'm doing now. When I came to America, I was adopted and came to America, and I lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan for a year with my adopted parents. They stayed there for a year, and they didn't like how things was going with me, and I couldn't make no friends or nothing there. So they decided to move to Chicago. And things start to change differently for me in Chicago. I, was a loner at the time. I didn't want to make no friends. I didn't want to be around nobody. I basically just did things on my own. At one point, before I went to prison, I had a good job working in a funeral home, which is Johnson Funeral Home that used to be on North Avenue in Sedgwick in Chicago, Illinois. Since then, the proprietor, Mr. Johnson, had passed away, and I lost my job. I was a beautician doing dead bodies, hair, fingernails, makeup, so forth like that. And when things went under and I lost my job and lost my house and just lost out everything, I went to do criminal activity. So far as I didn't do it automatically by myself. I got with this other individual, which was a female, and she introduced me to alcohol and drugs. I got involved with that for the time being with her. We was both homeless. I didn't want to see her out there on the streets by herself, so I decided that I would be there with her until we be able to come up and do something better. So what we did, we went to O'Hare Airport. We went and broke into the cars, taking personal belongings and everything out of people's cars, and taking it and reselling it to the people that's in stores and so forth that wanted to buy it, and make the money to feed our drug and alcohol habit. So after all of that, we went to a garage over there on the north side, to a hospital garage, and we broke into this person's car, and this person was on his way back from who he was seeing in the hospital, caught my co-defendant in his car. She was hollering and screaming, telling me to get up off of her. I ran to her aid, and I was, got more time than she did because she only got, 30 days, and then they released her. But I had to do 6 years in downstate. And first thing I went through, I went to court at Skokie, which is a 98.5% conviction rate court. And I had no way of beating the case because I had no attorney at the time. I had a public defender. The public defender said, you've been down so many times, so why would you would think that the judge would want to release you? I said, well, I'm not asking the judge to release me. I'm guilty, I'm part of this, and I did it, and hey, let me go on and do my time and get out. So they came with a plea to me. First, they came to me with 10 years. I said no, because they don't warrant no 10 years for me. Next thing, they came to me with 6. And I said, okay, I'll take the 6 and I'll go downstate. So I took the 6 years. First stop I went to was Stateville Correctional Center in the annex part of Stateville, the new part that was built. I stayed there for about a good week or 2. Then they sent me to Pinckneyville Correctional Center. Upon my arrival at Pinckneyville, things didn't look too well for being a trans woman. Dealing with harassment by the guards and harassment by the inmates, I felt very uncomfortable and felt unprotected by, this institution. So one day, I refused to get up and take my mask. They tried to force me to take my mask, which I was not on forced mask. And they got mad, and the lieutenant tried to cuff him up and try to break my wrist and try to hurt me. So I fought both the lieutenant and the regular guard. And upon fighting them, they didn't want me to stay there, so they said you're going to do a year across the board, year street grade, year in solitary confinement, and whatever else the other year they had stated upon me. After that, they packed me up and sent me to Pontiac. Upon my there at Pontiac, I stayed there on the East Cell House at Pontiac. And then while I was there, I was in a cell by myself at the one point until about 2 weeks later, they moved someone else in there with me. This person tried to literally have sex with me while I was sleeping. And we fought. And the guard said, oh, you initiated it, you wanted him to, and so forth, so you're going to segregation. So they put me in segregation. Upon my hearing, when I went before the committee, they said, are you guilty of this charge? I said, no, I'm not guilty of this charge because this person tried to rape me. And I'm not going to sit up there and let this person try to harm me and y'all don't do anything about it. So they said, well, we're going to give you a year in solitary confinement. I said, nah, that is not right. I mean, what did I do wrong to deserve a year? So they put me over there in East Cell House. And I stayed behind the door, in the cell, behind a steel door. You barely could see out of it. And I was on a steel bunk. The only thing I had is a mattress and one blanket, one sheet, and my personal belongings. I stayed that way for the time being until I got into it with the guard, and the guard stood up there and said I spit it on him and said that I called him out his name. That racked up a couple of more years added on to the 6 years I already had, making it a total of 8 years I had to do time for, but 3 of that 8 was spent in solitary confinement. My experience dealing with prisons has been very rough. I mean, I wouldn't wish it upon a human being to go through what I saw with my own eyes, being at Pontiac and being at any other institution, how they treated the mentally ill. The mentally ill, they don't care nothing about them. They treat them like they're animals. They throw them up against the wall all because they fight back at them and everything. And they just, abuse them and hurt them and beat them up. Sometimes they even cause a couple of them to even hang themselves. They just, suicide. And this is my experience, what I've been through when I was in the Illinois Department of Corrections.
Thank you.
That's on me. There's a number of things I want to get to, so I'll try to be succinct. I'm Gregory Koger. You can call me Gregory. I spent a long time in solitary confinement. When I was a teenager, my family lost their home. I started living on the streets, got involved with a street organization, and by the time I was 17 years old, I was charged as an adult and given a 20-year sentence in adult maximum security prison. I can talk about the details of that. I don't have a problem with it, but I'll skip them. Needless to say, I was in a street organization and ended up shooting someone in a rival organization who was threatening to kill me. When I was 17, before I was even convicted, they held me in solitary confinement in the Lake County Jail. I spent probably half the time I was in the county jail in solitary confinement there. I went to trial from solitary confinement when I was 17 in adult county jail. And so once I got to prison, the IDOC was becoming increasingly more oppressive and taking away some of the small rights that we had, and I got into numerous altercations with the authorities of the prison as I began to both experience this increase in repression as I began to study and read and to understand more about, the historical development of the United States and prisons and the capitalist system, and why was I and all these millions of other people locked in these prison cells. So, I went to solitary for things like walking in front of a lieutenant once, I'm coming out of the cell house, the lieutenant's standing there talking to another CO and says, don't walk in front of me. I said, okay, walk right in front of them, and they put me in seg for that. But the reason I did an indeterminate period of segregation was I got in a fight with some COs in Stateville. Long story short, one of the COs was trying to take away my television. I had paid for the television. I had had a television for a long time, and I wasn't going for it. So I got in a fight. They gave me an indeterminate period of segregation. The next day they sent me to Pontiac Correctional Center, North Cell House, 1 gallery, right? The picture as you saw in that cell. When I was in Stateville, I had done a year in SAG and I-House SAG, which I was looking at the map wrong, but I-House, yes, is, that actually has windows in I-House, which is a little bit different than most of the other solitary cells, say in Pontiac, Menard, Tams, which we haven't even talked about, Illinois Supermax, which Brian will talk a little bit more about. And Joliet Prison, which is where I first went, looks even more of a castle than almost anything. And I did time in solitary there as well. But the main period I did in solitary was an indeterminate period. I did over 6 years straight in solitary in Pontiac. I was in a North Cell House for 4 years-ish out of that time. And, Africa's described it, and Al's described it some, but it's just non-stop cacophony of people yelling and screaming and banging on doors, talking shit to everybody, and you're locked in a cell. I could literally reach out both of my arms and touch both walls, the picture that they showed from Menard is very similar to Pontiac cells. So it was in that solitary confinement, I was like looking at this and I'm like, look, am I ever going to get out of prison? Am I just going to keep fighting these people in little petty ways, or am I going to be able to get out of here and fight this system? So at a certain point, I just had to fall back and try to read and study as much as I could, just to get out of there and fight the system on a whole other front, And to add a little bit to Alan's piece, to go back to some of both the development of the prison itself and solitary confinement, they're very caught up with the developments of the United States and capitalism in particular. Because in the first prison systems that they really had, the models of solitary confinement were in what was called Cherry Hill Prison in Philadelphia, and they had another model that was in Auburn, New York, and the only difference between those two models of solitary confinement were in Cherry Hill, they never came out of their cells, and in Auburn, they let them come out for a certain period to work together in enforced silence, and they put hoods on these people whenever they moved around and stuff. In any case, and this was thought to be an advance over, as Michel Foucault talks about in Discipline and Punishment. Prior to the rise of the prison, they would just have corporal punishment, hang you, kill you, tear you from limb to limb. It was a new model, and that was what the thought of these penitentiaries were actually developed by Quaker religious people, that you would go and be locked up and you would think about your crime and repent to God and whatnot. But very, very quickly, the people running these prisons saw that they destroyed people's minds. In the middle of the 1800s, Charles Dickens came and viewed those prisons and said that solitary confinement was worse than physical torture, because it's a torture that you can't see. You can't see how it affects people. And as Alan alluded to, by the late 1800s, the United States Supreme Court actually let somebody out of their prison sentence because he was held in solitary confinement. And then they had a brief resurgence of it in a time when they had Alcatraz prison, which I think in roughly the 1930s to the 1950s. And then it came back in the 1970s, and very much a part of the rise of mass incarceration itself as being a counter-revolutionary, comeback to the movements for liberation that were coming up in this United States, from the anti-war movement to the Black Panthers, to the women's liberation movement. There was a whole, generation of people, and particularly black people, who are not going to go for the racism and injustice of this system. And in response to that, the United States government came back with their COINTELPRO tactics of assassinating and imprisoning most of the leaders of the Black Panther Party and other radical and revolutionary groups. And you know, you have George Jackson, who was a field marshal in the Black Panther Party, who was 17 years old, was sentenced to a 1 year to life in California prison, became the foremost prison-educated intellectual, you know, who was assassinated by the guards in San Quentin a month before Attica prison rebellion jumped off on September 9th, which we just had the 45th anniversary of, and there was a large nationwide prison strike in response to. But going back to what I was suggesting about both the rise of mass incarceration and the use of solitary confinement, was that they then brought back solitary confinement in this politically repressive atmosphere, and it was specifically designed to break people's spirits, in particular prisoners who were involved with radical revolutionary organizations or jailhouse lawyers, you know, or people who just were not going with the status quo. And that leads us to today, you know. And in fact, just as a counterpoint, one of the first supermax prisons that was built in the 1970s in Germany to house the Red Army faction's leadership. You know, and that was one of the first solitary cells, again, very specifically designed for a political purpose, to repress and destroy people who had a potential to take out a system that is globally exploitative and oppressive. And we see in this country 3 people a day killed by the police, 2.25 million people, principally Black and Latino, locked in prisons, you know. So I'm a revolutionary. I think that this whole system has to go, and then part of the work against that, as someone who came out of solitary confinement, is, you know, fighting solitary confinement and mass incarceration. And I'll only say a brief thing about some of the work that we're looking to do in the future. You know, these talks kill us, you know what I'm saying? Brian is agonizing right now, I know that. I've been agonized the last, you know, couple of days, and in fact, I barely talked about, you know, the actual implications of how solitary affected me, because I like to talk about the bigger picture, and that's a way, I think it's important information, but it's also a way for me not to fucking talk about, you know, how it's affected me. But there's days I don't even leave my house most days, you know? There's weeks that I don't leave my house, you know? Like, anyhow, it's something that is, you know, I got out of prison almost 10 years ago, and aside from a political case that I fought that gave me 300 days in Cook County Jail for videotaping a political statement on an iPhone, which was a whole other side ridiculous point, that I ended up doing 2 weeks on hunger strike in solidarity with the California prison hunger strike when they locked me back up right in the middle of that. Thanks, idiots. But anyhow, you know, I mean, it's one of the major things in my life is still how solitary confines me every day. 10 years later, it's the biggest thing, you know. Anyhow, so, and you know, I've done a lot of work, you know, fighting the system since I've been out. I was in Ferguson, I probably pictured you saw from Ferguson, you know, but, you know, I barely can function from day to day, for real. And so a big thing that me and Brian are trying to do, you know, my doctor is one of the founders of the Koger Center, which treats survivors of torture, except from the United States. There's some different people that are running the center from when he started it, and they get funding from the United States government, so why would we talk about torture survivors in the United States? But me and Brian and some of the founders of the Koger Center are going to be starting our own Center for the Treatment of Survivors of Torture in the United States, solitary confinement in particular. And really, you know, I barely get by from day to day. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and the great irony is Germany, which started it, has abandoned it. They don't do it anymore. Their prisons are much more like Norway's. Brian.
I work at the Uptown People's Law Center. I read prison letters all day, every day. Most of the prisoners in solitary confinement are Latino and minorities. They're classified as what's called a security threat group. If you're a street gang member, you come to prison, you can be locked up in solitary confinement. My situation is different than Greg's and Afrika's. I was locked in solitary confinement for 23 years without a disciplinary report. I did not violate prison rules. I did not do anything wrong. I was held in closed supermax prisons, which meant that when I came out my cell, I was chained, shackled, and escorted by 2 guards in riot uniforms with a gun at the back of my head at all times. Nobody else was allowed out in the prison whenever I moved or somebody else moved. There was roughly at one time the most, maybe 300 of us in TAMS. Prior to TAMS, I was also held in what was called the Circuit, an experimental program in the state of Illinois, which was a psychological program. We were used to train tactical teams, which meant every time they opened up a prison, we came in and we got the shit beat out of us every meal, every day, until the tactical team had enough practice that they didn't have to use us no more. Then they sent us to another prison and did it. This went on for 7.5 years, and finally a federal judge took me off that program. He was like, "What do you do?" And the statement from the Department of Corrections, it was their prerogative to use me in psychological experiments, and that's it. And I stayed on there for the first 7.5 years. First experiment, first time in solitary, I was 14 years old because I was too small. So instead of putting me someplace where I could cope or do something, they locked me alone. Where Greg and Afrika talk about the noise, I was locked in buildings by myself. No noise, no TV, no radio, no human contact, ever. Greg talks about the effects. I know what it's like to be alone. At the law center where I work alone. I work upstairs. There's 4 offices, I work up there alone. My self-imposed solitary. I don't like being around people, I don't understand being around people. I won't ride the bus, I won't ride the train. For anything, I get terrified. At one time when I used to talk about this, I used to literally rip my fingernails off while I was talking and yet realize I was doing it until somebody pointed out the blood dripping off my hands. I was placed in 1998 when TAMS opened. I was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. My job was making officers' uniforms. I made their officers' uniforms, I walked out, I put it in their car, I came back in, I gave them their car keys. I'm 15 minutes from the Mexican border. Las Cruces has a law, you must have a gun in your car at all times, so every one of these cars had a gun in it. March 28th, I'm going to work. 2 U.S. Marshals run into the prison with automatic weapons, screaming on the ground, and I'm looking on like, what the hell's going on? It was for me. They threw me on the ground, they stuck guns in my head, they chained me up and strapped me to a dolly cart like I was an animal, rolled me out the prison and put me on an airplane and flew me to TAMS. For 12 years, I stayed in TAMS. Nobody could tell me why I was there or knew why I was there. Alan represented me in the suit there, and when I arrived, my hearing was, "Why are you here?" They put a gun in my head and brought me here. My mom, who had visited me a week earlier in Mexico, came to visit me in TAMS, and they told her that they couldn't let me around my mother because I was so violent I'd kill my mom. And they put these labels like I'm worse to the worst, I'm a monster, to justify holding me in this place. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't catch any disciplinary reports, I didn't touch anybody, I didn't even take a cookie out the chocolate. For 12 years, until I got out of prison, that's how they kept me. One of my requirements for parole is I had to see a psychiatrist to make sure I was not homicidal for what they did to me, and if I was, they were going to civilly commit me for the rest of my life, what they did to me. And I didn't do nothing wrong. I got a friend. He's been in solitary since 1983. He can barely talk. He can barely function. And he's still there. He didn't get anything wrong. He's still sitting there. Earlier this year, the state finally apologized to me about what we did to you was wrong. They still won't tell me why. They won't tell my doctor what they did to me so they can help me. Every week, I gotta see a psychiatrist. I went from 187 pounds to 110 pounds. I lost the will to live. I lived in a gray box. Couldn't hear nothing, couldn't talk to nobody for 12 years. And then they pushed me out the door. And this is why we have to stop solitary. What my family went through, what other families went through, what I went through, somebody else is still going through right now. Alan's been fighting for me since 1983. I was one of the ones in there. I was a kid. When I come out of prison, I never seen a cell phone. I've never driven a car. I'm terrified out here. And most days I don't think I belong out here. Because that's what I know. That's what they did to me. And my doctor says, for somebody that was raised by the state, alone in a box, you're doing remarkably well. And there's days I gotta figure out a reason why not to put a gun in my mouth and blow my brains out. Because I don't think I belong out here. And that's what solitary confinement does to a person. Thank you.
This is the time we open it up for thoughts from the audience. Comments, questions, anything? That's a hard act to follow.
And the reason we do this is you have to stop this. You guys are the generation that can stop it. You guys are the new lawmakers. You're the new presidents. You're the new lawyers. You have to stop this. There's 80,000 people in America being tortured. My doctor will tell you what they did to me is so horrific. For me to sit and tell you that I don't belong around people, they really fucked me up. And you guys are the ones that can stop it. That's why I go talk like this. That's why I expose myself to this pain. You guys have to stop this. It is so friggin' important. And to lock somebody up because you think they might do something wrong someday. Under the Patriot Act, any one of you guys can get on the phone and make a wrong comment, and you're mad about something, and you don't like some politician, you say something wrong, they have the right to lock you up in solitary confinement indefinitely under the Patriot Act. That's the law of the United States. You need to realize these are screwed up laws. It has to stop. To lock up somebody because you're Latino, black, white, and we think you're in a street gang, a security threat group, and maybe someday you might do something wrong in prison, so we're gonna lock you up. And that's what they did to all them guys in California. That's what they're doing to all the guys in Illinois. There's guys that have been in solitary confinement for 30 years in Illinois. And the state of Illinois doesn't even realize it. The people that put them there are out of office, retired, and dead. And nobody knows why these guys are there. We're gonna open up a 2,000 bed solitary confinement federal prison in Illinois in the next few months. Federal government came out with a report that they don't know who's in solitary confinement, why they're there, or how long they've been there.
Or worse.
And we're gonna put 2,000 more people in there? No. You guys have the power, you can stop it.
Comments, questions? Somebody say something. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm really amazed by your resiliency, and I'm wondering if any of you could speak to the extent that you have been able to heal, what has helped you heal?
I've gotten worse. I've gotten worse. I've gotten worse. You know, at first was just, I'm out. And now I'm standing out here. I don't understand it. I walking here. I got bumped into maybe 15 times, and me and Greg were shocked. You won't bump into somebody in prison. You don't. Without saying, excuse me, pardon me. You have common courtesy and respect in prison. Out here, people have earbuds in, they walk by, bam, hit you, and just keep going. They're lost in the world, you know? And this is the world I know, and it's such an ugly world because everybody's got a knife just trying to stay alive to go home. And yet people out here, they don't get it.
Afrika, you want to say
Yes, I'm seeing a therapist right now for the trauma of what I've been through in solitary confinement. Definitely dealing with solitary and dealing with my own tragedy of my parents. Both of those things is an ongoing thing. I still wake up each and every morning around 1 in the morning. I don't sleep as much. I don't get 8 hours. I don't get 7 hours. I sleep less. And I'll be up at 1 and something in the morning due to the fact of having these nightmares about my parents. And I also have the problems of having to deal with being in enclosures and not the larger rooms or small spaces. Dealing with solitary for the 3.5 years I've been in solitary. What helped me deal with this situation so far? By me writing to Black and Pink Chicago and Boston, Massachusetts for a pen pal. I wrote them and they have wrote me back and said, Africa, there's a chapter in Chicago that you can write to get a pen pal. And I did. And upon it, getting that pen pal, it was a person by the name of Megan Selby that has been my pen pal for 3.5 years. And even since I've been out, we've been great friends till this day. I have left prison upon release on February 4th, 2016. I just recently got out. And I've been out for the past 8 months, going on 9. So, going through what I've been through has been a milestone. I managed to make it through the help of my friends, Alan, and those that surround with at this table with me now, and some of those that I know personally that's been in my life since I've been out of prison. And that's how I personally dealt with the situation at hand.
Thank you.
And believe this, by writing letters to somebody in solitary, you can save their life. So we all give up hope. Give up hope. You sit in their box day after day. The only reason I know about 9/11 was because I was on the phone with Alan when it happened. It's the only reason I know. I didn't see TV or radio. It's whatever what all you guys take for granted out here. Is like I'm shocked by these things. You guys have everything at your fingertips, and it's like you told me what a cell phone was in prison. I thought you were a liar.
Who else?
Do you want it? I was just wondering if you want to
great.
share.
In a lot of ways, I actually feel like Brian. Well, I'll put it this way. What has helped me has been, as I stated, while I was in solitary, the only thing that kept me going was knowing when I get out of that cell, I could fight these motherfuckers on a whole other level. And one of the major things I've been doing since I've been out has been organizing against mass incarceration and solitary and police murder and this entire capitalist system. So to the extent that, something has helped me, I think fighting against injustice is definitely a part of that. But in that process, what part of why I feel worse is looking back and thinking, all the shit that I've been involved with, I can count on one hand actual real friends that I have, people who actually give a shit about me, who, there's people I've worked with for almost a decade who got orders not to talk to me and don't talk to me, just ridiculous ass shit. So, and also, I still feel out of place. I don't know how to meet somebody, go on a date, I don't know how to talk to people, I have no clue how to do any of that, and,
Question right back there.
I was wondering if you have any recommendations for how you would go about changing the system. Are there politicians that you support or organizations or how?
Well, all of us are members of the Coalition to Stop Solitary. We were talking earlier about last year, Representative Sean Ford entered a bill to limit it, and a group called the John Howard Association killed it. they came out and said, well, there's not enough officers to take these guys to trial if we let them out of solitary, so just leave them in there.
Prisons are already too overcrowded, so how can we let people out of solitary?
You know, and the realistic part is basically saying it's okay to torture. You know? I mean, you guys see what it did to me. You know what I mean? I can't fake what it did to me. I couldn't make that up from my worst nightmare. And most of the states that have gotten rid of solitary, Alan's worked with a lot of these ex-directors and wardens, the violence has gone down in them state prison systems because they put the money into education. Prisoners used to be able to get a Pell Grant to go to college to get an education. We're self-educated. We had to teach ourselves in prison. There was no schools for us. I mean, I actually copied the Bible word for word to keep my sanity. You know, and it's
a long book.
yes, it is. Took me 1 year, 9 months, and 2 days. You know, but there's got to be something better. But also, if you look at any religious book, man is not meant to be alone like that. You know, and it's join these groups, help get other university students involved, join up with other universities, because you guys are the power behind all of it. You guys are the ones that are at the forefront now. You know, Alan's been at it, like he said, since 1982. I've been enduring it since 1982. You know, he has one story, I have another, Greg has another, and basically me and Greg are ones who keep each other going every day. You know, we check on each other every day. How you doing? You know, and some days we won't hear from us. Hey man, just let me know you're alive. You know, and it's to do this to a child, to anybody, is just wrong. Even if I kill somebody in prison, I get a hearing. I get a year to indefinite seg. You know, where I get a chance to fight it. When you take somebody and just lock them up indefinitely, you're there. That's it. It's over with. Goodbye. Guys were willing to starve themselves to death in California. 30,000 of them. We just want to know how to get out. Guys in our minds did it too. There has to be more brains than what we've had in our politicians and prison systems, because there's been no thinking. You know, and they hate it when I come to testify, and I'm not gonna hold my tears back, and I'm not gonna bite my tongue what they did to me, especially because I didn't do nothing wrong. I didn't violate your rules. I wrote grievances. Joe Sorrentino, a friend of mine, on Thursday he cooked the warden steaks. He wrote a grievance. Friday he's in TAM's Supermax for 10 years. How could he feed the warden one day and be in solitary confinement for 10 years the next? Alan and Belinda's Law Center fought for him and won. And whatever proved, he was sent there because he wrote a grievance. He wrote a freaking grievance. So you guys are the ones that can mobilize and step forward. You guys are the new lawyers and politicians. You know, in every aspect of life, we represent so many guys that got out of set TAMs. They're on Social Security for the rest of their life as taxpayers. Now you got to pay for us free housing, free medical care, free mental health care, free food, because we did something wrong and went to jail. That's our punishment. Then we got tortured in there, and now we come out and we're a burden to society because we were tortured inside. That's backwards. I feel so grateful that I earned a paycheck. But there's some days, like I'm telling you, I'm gonna be shit at work tomorrow. You know, I'll sit upstairs and I'll cry most of the day. I have a woman that sits there now. Tonight we were sitting there talking, I'll just start crying. It won't stop now because I talked about it today. And I talked about it last week and the week before. And we'll talk about it again this week. Because it has to stop. And everybody's like, why are you killing yourself doing this? Me and Greg go through it all every week. Because it has to stop. There has got to be a better way to treat a human being. You go to the zoo. Animals in our habitat-friendly environment. The only thing locked up in a cage now is a human being. That's it.
Let me give a couple specifics so I can answer your question. So, spreading the word is really important as to what's going on in solitary, whether it's talking to your friends or writing a blog post or sharing all this stuff on Facebook. All that is very useful. The world has to know what we're doing to people, and that's probably the most important thing people can do. When politicians are running for office, ask them the question, what are you going to do about mass incarceration? What are you doing about solitary in Illinois? Are you for it? Are you against it? Are you willing to vote to eliminate it? When the bill comes around next spring, lobby your legislature, wherever you live. On a more personal level, you can start corresponding with somebody in solitary. I don't know if there's groups here who want to do that. You can do it through the university, or you can do it through some other student organization, or we'll be glad to give you some names of people who sit in solitary in Illinois. People have collected books, either for, like there's a Chicago Women's to Women Prisoners, Books to Women Prisoners group in Chicago, which collects books all the time. You send women prisoners all over the Midwest, or just send them to an individual prisoner and start like a book club with one person where you both read the same book and you correspond about that book. Raise some money for people like us that are trying to fight this stuff. There's lots of things to do. The answer is do something. And doing nothing is the only thing that's wrong. Some will work, some won't, but so what? Try something else. So some hands over there.
Yeah, question.
I don't want to Liz too long because that's kind of a good ending point, but I had a quick question. I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Tam's is closed,
Yes.
right? And can you talk, were you all involved in that fight?
Yes.
to close
Brian
it?
and I were.
Can you talk a little bit about?
Sure. Well, yeah, okay, so there's both an inside story and the outside story, and it was very much a joint fight between the prisoners and people on the outside, and it was really two different things on the outside. There was a legal strategy, which I was directly involved in. We sued TAMS, that was one of the strategies. And up there, a due process sort of claim saying if you're gonna put people in a supermax prison, you at least have to articulate a reason, which is, and Brian was one of our star witnesses, because they never did. During the entire time he was there, they never could articulate why he was there. So that was the sort of legal strategy. It was also an organizing strategy on the outside. Lots of grassroots done, starting with the families of people who were inside, but then going out much further. Some very creative work. Some photographers got together, for example, and wrote guys at TAM saying, send me what you would like a picture of, because they're so isolated. So then they go out and take that picture, and they eventually had like an art exhibit of the pictures they took, and then the guys inside got those pictures. But we couldn't have done what we done on the outside without the help of people like Brian who were organizing inside, and stayed as sane as you could, and definitely led the fight inside.
We got TAMS, we couldn't have underwear. We had to wear a jumpsuit. I was a man, you guys know what that's like to wear a jumpsuit, especially when you're sleeping. We had no bilingual nurses, counselors, officers, anything. We had several guys that couldn't do nothing, speak Spanish. There was one on our wing that took nitroglycerin every day. He couldn't even talk to a nurse. Guys could not go to school. Guys could never have a TV or radio indefinitely for the rest of their life. There were certain rules that we didn't like. I read a book called 10 Men Dead about Bobby Sands and the Irish hunger strikers that were fighting for their political rights. And we organized a hunger strike in TAMS in 2000, I think it was.
2000.
May 1st we started. And there was 4 of us that lasted 28 to 30 days. And quietly, the Department of Corrections made concessions. They could not acknowledge they were making these concessions because then it looks like they're negotiating with what they call terrorists. You know? Hey, the guy that just organized this prison strike nationwide has been charged with terrorism. He's a prisoner. He organized a peaceful strike, and they say it's terrorism. I became such a hunger striker. My longest hunger strike was 48 days. I died. And they brought me back. They ran the IVs into my neck and everything. But like Alan was talking about, where you get a book and you get a ticket. I did get a ticket in TAMS when I was getting ready to go home. I got legal mail. And I signed for it. They put it in my cell. They chained me up and they took me to the yard. While I'm on the yard, they shook my cell down and took that legal mail and wrote me a ticket for the envelope the legal mail came in. They said there's string in this envelope. I'm like, what? And it was going to stop me from getting out of prison. So I went on a hunger strike. And it was roughly like the 45th day or 46th day. I'm in the hospital. And the deputy director's standing there talking to me, and the officer brings legal mail to me. And I sign for it. And the officer walks away, and I hand the envelope to the deputy director and says, this is what I got a ticket for. He goes, what do you mean? I said, this is what I got a ticket for. Same situation, same envelope. He goes, well, let me look into it. By the time he looked into it is when I died on the gurney. There was no vital signs, there's no nothing. And we'll give him whatever the fuck he wants, get him to eat. And I had IVs stuck in me everywhere, putting whatever they had to put back in there to get my vitals to go back again. But they were gonna stop me from going home over a fucking envelope that they just gave me. And these are the stupid things that I had to fight for. We had a guy that had I hadn't seen his mom or anything. And I didn't really like the guy, you know, because of his case. You know, I was judging another prisoner. I did a hunger strike with him. His mom's dying. They won't let her in. And I walked him through the hunger strike, and I starved myself for another comrade in prison. He didn't know how to do a hunger strike, and I had to teach him it's a psychological war. I had to do 27 days with him. He got his visit back. He got them all back, and he's like, I'm a Latin king, and you're in my opposition. You're somebody that I would kill on the streets, and you just sacrificed your life for me. But that's what we were doing for each other in TAMS. What they did is they brought black, white, and Latino prisoners together, and we became a collective force. And that's how we were able to help. And I wanted rules, and I'm finding rule books that were made, and we didn't know about the rules. You know, it's like we said, we wanted rules, how do we get out? So it's a fight. The family members, my mom, when they told her that he'd kill you if we let her on, my mom turned around, looked at the lady, listen here, bitch. My mom don't cuss. My mom lost it. She started the TAMS committee. She went and talked to other family members. Why are they saying your son's here? And they're like, well, they said, yeah, they said this about my son, but actually this is what he was doing in New Mexico. And they're like, what? And the family members started talking to each other and found out the state created this huge lie. They had this 500-bed prison with nobody to put there. So that all the warden, well, who don't you like? I don't like Nelson. Send him there. That's literally what came out in the transcripts at the end of the day.
Yep.
These people were allowed to pick whoever they didn't like. With a schizophrenic inmate that can't abide by the prison rules, was creating problems, they don't like them, so they send them to TAMS. Can you imagine being on the yard and you're able to scream to somebody? I mean, you really got to scream on the next yard. Next day you come out to the yard, you hear voices. You think somebody's out there. Somebody out there. And they had guys in TAMS that were cutting off body parts. And they said they're malingering because they're trying to get out of TAMS. Well, listen here, if you're going to cut your finger off or part of your body, there's something wrong with you. When I'm willing to kill myself, to starve myself to death, there's something wrong with me. Just to get out of here. Friend Danny Johnson killed himself in TAMS. Practiced for a week, put a bag over his head because he got tired. And this is when me and Alan were going out testifying about closing TAMS. And I love Danny. Danny's my friend. And I'm breaking my ass going out here talking, hurting myself talking. And I opened up the letter and I read it. I was so fucking mad. You gave up on me. And then Glenn now was like, hold it, you got tired in there too. I broke my neck. I tried to take myself out. I got so tired. Can you imagine 10 years like that? 23 years. And I look at it like, okay. So then we got Danny's mental health record. And Alan and everybody went through it. Alan went down and saw him right away. Every doctor said what he did was sane. Him killing himself in that situation to get out of being tortured like that is sane. There's nothing wrong. What does that say about our society?
We have one more question up front, we should probably stop, is it? In that area there. Maybe?
You had a question? Yeah, you had a-
It was answered actually.
Okay. Anybody have a question? Comment? Thought?
Fuck solitary, that's
There you go, right there. I know you're fine.
And if you guys want to send people to the meeting,
Let them talk.
if you want to send somebody to the meeting to stop Solitary Coalition, join us. Join us.
You mentioned, Alan, that certain things just don't work. They don't function for the purpose that the government says they're functioning for. So, in what case, in what instance do you get to tell a judge that, and try to make them prove what they want out of this scenario and prove that it is functioning for that purpose?
Well, that's the idea of these Eighth Amendment cases, is that you say it's inflicting real harm on people, so you better have a really good reason to do that. And then they try to come up with a really good reason, but they don't. They never can. So that's the trick. I mean, for years they've been able to just say security. I mean, it's very much like happens on a national level. All you got to say is national security, and everybody lies over, and you have the Patriot Act and everything else. Same thing happens in prison. They are doing something really terrible to people and say, well, we got to do this because of security. And generally judges have been walking away. I think that's what's changing. That's why I think Justice Kennedy's statement up there was so important. It sends a message saying, we're not just going to close our eyes because you say security. Just because you say these are gang members, we're not just gonna say, okay, you can do whatever you want to. Now you have to, we're gonna really start looking. And that's, I think, partly it's lawyering, but I think more importantly, it's society itself is being asked those questions. And I don't think courts are ever gonna be the cutting edge of social change. That's just not what courts are designed to do. So there needs to be a real grassroots movement out here of people who are aware of what's happening and are willing to say, I don't care, even if it does work, you can't do this, but it doesn't. And that's the message we have to tell everybody, is that it doesn't, even if this worked, it would be wrong, but it does not work. There are other ways to do this, Norway, California, wherever you want to look at. Other states have said we're not gonna do this, other countries don't even try, and none of them are falling apart. So stop torturing people, because there's no reason to do it.
Right, this is a complete aberration in the history of the
Right.
world. Nobody has put people in solitary confinement in the numbers or for the time that is going on right now by the United States government. Unprecedented in human history, a regime of torture that's being inflicted upon hundreds of thousands of people.
Not even close, nothing, it's not like this is just barely worse than everything else. Nowhere else has ever come anywhere near us.
So I'm asking you from the bottom of your heart, so that if you have it in your heart, become a pen pal to a prisoner, because prisoners, some don't have family, definitely family died while they was incarcerated. Others that just want to have someone to talk to and be able to correspond to from the outside world. So think about it, have some thought about it, and become a pen pal today.
Yeah, Black and Pink has a Facebook page, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
regular get involved, I don't know what you call them, what are the sign-ups?
Yeah,
Orientations.
third Monday of every month at Second Unitarian. It's at Barry and Clark. 6 to 9, come by and you can look through introduction letters from prisoners and find a pen pal.
And we've also got a list at the Law Center.
Right, and you can go to our website, uplcchicago.org, sign up for a newsletter. You can get some friends together and donate some money, that'd be really nice too. There's a nice little donate button there.
We try to visit a prison every month, but I was actually doing like one a week.
I've done 3 in the last week, so I don't know where this 1 month came from.
And he actually goes into the prison, not the visiting room.
Right.
He walks where the prisoners are to see what it's really like.
And in terms of some of the organizing that me and Brian are working on that I spoke about, you can go to the website torturesurvivorsagainstsolitary.com, and hopefully we'll have some more concrete things that people can be involved in within the next few months.
But in the meantime, just sharing the video, you've got a whole bunch of
Yes,
videos
yes.
and written statements by people who survived
Yes.
solitary and their families.
The ones we were talking
Share
about
them.
earlier.
Share them.
Yeah.
Like we were talking earlier with Natalie. I didn't realize what my mom went through until me and Greg started videoing family members. It's like, wow, it's bad.
Yeah.
But you guys can do a lot. And I'm sure you guys can come up with ways we ain't thought of because your generation has so much at your fingertips.
And if anyone wants who's not sitting here in this room, wants a sort of quick 15-minute introduction to what solitary does to people, there's a nice online documentary, 15 minutes long, called The Gray Box. Stars Brian and one other people that went through TAMS. It's well worth 15 minutes and it's free and it's on Vimeo, and just Google Gray Box and solitary and the first thing that shows up. Share it with your friends.
And another good note
Have a
is
house meeting and call 5 people together and serve beer and watch videos.
Juan Mendez from the United Nations is in the Gray Box with me.
Yep.
He has tried to visit prisons in the United States. He's a special rapporteur for torture at the UN. They will not let him in this country in his official capacity. And now his term's up. He has fought so hard on solitary.
That's amazing. I just wanted to mention that I was probably at another lecture. There's a book called Crook County. It's pretty cool. It's basically describing how unjust the law is right now, and in certain communities, if you are charged or convicted or sent to prison, you're thought of as almost a martyr, because there's such a valid, justified reason for thinking that the person likely does not deserve the punishment they're about to get. And I don't really have anything else to say, but like that, it's that's kind of the cutting edge of journalism, frankly, right now, is to help everyone understand that in certain communities the law is enforced so unfairly that that people are thought of as martyrs if they go to prison.
I'm not gonna hold you all up. I very much appreciate y'all for coming and giving y'all stories. I got here kind of late, so excuse me if I missed it. But hearing you all talk about the various ways that they would like to keep you all in and try to give you all more time, it sounds like there's like corporations involved in that trying to keep money. So I'm trying to make money. So I was gonna ask, like, how visible are those corporations, and like how able are y'all to like go like directly against them?
All right, so I want to push back against that a little bit. There's certainly a lot of mythology that privatization is what's driving a lot of this. Private corporations try to make a lot of money off of this system. In fact, private prisons are horrible, so don't get me wrong. I'm not at all defending them. I always say locking people up should be hard, it should be expensive, and it should never be anybody's profit center. So I'm all against closing private prisons entirely, making them unconstitutional. But they represent less than 10% of the entire prison population in the country. So they're not the major driver of mass incarceration, they're not the major driver of recidivism. I think it's political. That's the way I look at it. Instead of solving difficult problems like poverty, like the inequality of wealth, like our healthcare system, it's much easier for a politician to stand up and say, tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime, I'm locking people up. It's easy, it's very concrete. You can say, we've got longer sentences. If you look right here in Chicago, the first thing Mayor Emanuel says when there's another shooting is, we need higher mandatory minimums for gun crimes. We need to lock more people up for longer. Because it's a really easy solution. You don't have to worry about the fact that you close 50 schools and you close half the mental health centers in the city. So I think it is driven much more by politicians trying to avoid the real economic problems. And as Greg says, if they began to talk about the real economic problems, it would go much deeper into society and we would expose a lot of things that are wrong in the society. And it's so much easier to divert everybody's attention and say, oh, the problem is we don't lock enough people up in prison. So yes, I think private profits are important. I think that it's also important to know it's not just private prisons, but there's a whole lot of people who make money out of the prison system. Everybody from the people who sell the food, people who sell shower shoes, the people who build the prisons, the banks that finance those prisons, all those people make some money off of it. So it's not about private prisons. So it really isn't. The prison industrial complex is real. But I don't think it's profit driven. It is politics driven, and it's people in this room and people like us who have to say, no, we're not falling for that line anymore. We want our politicians to deal with the real problems, not just lock people up and pretend and hide the problems.
I think,
We can go on.
yes. And I get, kind of where your question's coming from, and I think for a lot of us, it's really hard to understand, how much of this is just like gross negligence, no one taking responsibility and maintaining the status quo, people are being locked up, no one knows why, you've been there for so long and no one's taking responsibility, but they're just doing their job, blinders on, not thinking like a human being, and how much of it is someone really having responsibility and having doing real evil, basically. And so I think that's really hard for me to understand, where is, I get the former part of it, but where is the second part?
So let me answer
At
that.
the state level,
Well, let me. You don't have to look at it at the state level. You can look at it nationally. And I think if you Google my review of the Attica, there's a recent book on Attica, Blood in the Water, and my review of it really addresses exactly that question. It was very intentional. Out of Attica, there's two ways we could. Everybody know what Attica is? Before I go further, it was uprising in New York State, 1971. All right, prisoners took over the prison. Sometimes I start telling the story.